Hello once again, and welcome to another edition of the SaskAgToday.com Roundtable. I'm joined by 620 CKRM Agri-News Director Ryan Young out of Regina, as well as the Chief Agricultural Editor for SaskAgToday.com, Kevin Hirsch. I'm GX94 Yorkton Agriculture Director Doug Falconer. And of course, gentlemen, all three of us got a chance to meet up in Saskatoon this week at Ag in Motion. Kevin, it was quite the week.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to go around and see what everybody is displaying, and great to meet and greet with a whole bunch of producers. Interesting how variable crop conditions are. You talk to some producers from Westlock, Alberta, as I sat down for lunch one day, and there it's just been horrendously wet in that Edmonton area. And other areas you talk about that crops are really, really good, and they're really pleased with them. A couple of the things that you guys covered a lot of different events and a lot of different things going on at Ag in Motion. A couple of things that stood out for me is I was really interested to see the Nexat display. And back in March at Regina's farm show, they had a booth, but not the massive machine there. But their machine number 4 has come over from Germany, and they brought it to Ag in Motion as a static display, and they'll be testing it between Regina and Moose Jaw with their 3 other machines they have in Canada. And this is just a huge platform on which you can put either a seeder or a sprayer or a combine. A very different approach, a very massive machine, an impressive display. And the other thing that I thought really stood out, even though we didn't do anything specifically on it, was drones were way more prevalent. Drones, drone tenders, so that you can change the battery and fill them up more quickly. And I think that's come because of the change in regulation, where now pesticide application, as long as it's approved for aerial use, can be applied by drone. And that I think has really kick-started interest in what drones can do. So those are some of the things that stood out for me. What about you guys?
I guess I'll go next. One of the things that kind of stood out to me was always the attendance. It's really kind of hard to gauge if it's consistent with previous years or if it was a little less, but to me it kind of looked like it was a little bit less in our area. But maybe a caveat with that is the fact that, it was 30 degrees outside pretty much 2 out of the 3 days. It was really warm, so I could imagine there was a lot of people that were seeking shelter in the tents or some of the semi-permanent structures that were there at the site. So I'd be really curious to kind of see where the attendance numbers are at, whether they're kind of consistent around that 30,000 mark or a little bit more or less in that range. One other thing that I wish I kind of got to, Kevin, you kind of mentioned it too, was the drone demonstrations. I wish I kind of gone to check out some of the drones there and see how they work. I've only seen them on display, but never in action in person. So I guess that's a thing on the to-do list for next year. But one other thing that kind of stood out was just seeing some systems that were on display from PTX as part of a tour that I was on Wednesday. It's really cool to see some of the systems that they have for autonomous equipment, having it connected to a tractor with an air cart or a harrow, and seeing that run by itself as you set the parameters on a map and stuff. That was really cool to see. Kind of winced a little bit at the cost of this thing, but I guess depending on your situation, it might be money well spent. But really cool to see all the advanced technology at Ag in Motion. Doug, was there anything that stood out to you?
Well, I did find it interesting that we did have a group stop by our booth. I believe it was on Wednesday. And Ryan, of course, you remember them there too. They were a sponsor for us for the broadcast booth. That was that Agriculture Rural Exchange Program people. They're the ones that they're trying to line up people to go to foreign countries to work on their farm, and then they'll come back and work on farms here, that kind of thing. And they mentioned to us that they've been on the waiting list to become an exhibitor at this thing for about 5 years now. They've been waiting. So even though perhaps attendance was down a little bit this year, definitely there isn't a lack of interest when it comes to exhibitors. So definitely if it was a 1 year blip, well, I guess we'll find out. But obviously, there's still a lot of business going on there. One of the other things, of course, was there was a group from South Africa in attendance. And I know, Ryan, you had spoken to Rob O'Connor in the past about how they don't advertise outside of Western Canada. So other groups are hearing about what's going on in Saskatoon at Ag in Motion, and they're coming irrespective of whether or not they've been advertised to. So that's a good sign as well. As for other events this week, obviously both the Manitoba and Saskatchewan crop reports were out. Both saw basically good weather over the past week, and both reported good crop development. Does that surprise you, Kevin?
I guess I think there's a real variability out there. I'm sitting in southwest Saskatchewan, and here it's drying out rapidly. Producers would actually love to see another significant rain. Crops are maturing. The crop is getting smaller, not bigger. West of me, if you look at the Sask Ag map for topsoil moisture, they're actually showing some short conditions. Right here, it's not showing short yet, but I suspect the map next week, unless something changes precipitation-wise, there'll be a larger area reporting as short. So the heat here is not doing us any favors, but it's probably different in other areas that have been consistently wet, where they like to see some dry weather, but perhaps it would be better if it wasn't quite the heat range that we're seeing. So the crop reports are always a bit of a lagging indicator by the time they're compiled and published and the information comes out. So I think the heat is hurting crops in some instances. So we'll see when the next crop report comes out next week.
And Ryan, you had a chance to drive to Regina, to Saskatoon and back over the past few days. How are crops looking on your journeys?
Yeah, kind of adding to what Kevin said, I can see a little bit of variability, especially when it comes to canola, for example. There's a lot of canola fields that look like they're on schedule, and, the yellow flowers are in bloom and in full force. And there's other fields that are just starting to flower and a little bit behind for this time of year. So kind of a variability in that regard. And I'm remembering too, there's one field north of where I live. There's kind of a little bit of damage, a little bit of unseeded acres there. I can't tell which field, what kind of crop it is exactly, but there is definitely some spots where there is no crop there. I would guess that's due to the flooding that we had earlier in the season. So not looking good, but there's definitely some other fields that are in pretty good shape around the Regina area and around my travels as well. Doug, I could imagine that there's some variability as well in the Yorkton area.
Yeah, in the Yorkton area, but basically from Saskatoon to Yorkton, I saw some really nice stands all the way. A lot of them very tall. So obviously there's been a lot of moisture in our path. And I guess it'll just be a wait and see to see how well everything fills, I guess, over the next month or so, as we're probably not all that far away from harvest in the big scheme of things. So crops looking good out here. As for crops, canola prices saw a bit of a jump over the past week. Kevin, you were monitoring that.
Yeah, it was some dramatic increases, and then you see some significant drops. But over the week, a significant rise in canola prices. And I don't always time it right. I've got a little bit of canola locked in for fall delivery at $15, which looked good, 6 or 8 weeks ago, and I locked in a little bit more at $16 a bushel, a little over. And this week, with the price rise, I locked in a little bit more, a little over $17 a bushel. So whether that's the right thing to do or not, the rising price sure does increase optimism about returns. And canola is the shining star as far as what's likely to make producers money this year.
And of course, while we were attending Ag in Motion right here in Yorkton, LDC had a grand opening for their expanded canola crushing plant, as well as their brand new pea protein production facility. So now we'll be able to crush about a little over 2 million metric tons of canola per year here. And when it comes to pea protein, it's around 75,000 metric tons annually for yellow peas. What are your thoughts on this news, Kevin?
course, we knew this was in place. This was the grand opening. I hadn't actually heard the pea capacity yet, and they are in stark contrast. 2 million tons of canola versus only 75,000 tons of yellow peas. So basically, yellow peas off roughly 75,000 acres or fewer acres in a typical year. Not to diminish that, but the scale of each as far as impact at the farm gate and for farm returns is a little bit different. We still have a lot of peas that go to the export market rather than being processed domestically, whereas in the canola industry, we're approaching where 75% of the canola is staying here to be crushed and then sent out as oil and meal. So a little different states of the industry, but great news to see those jobs and that economic activity.
Yeah, when it comes to jobs, they're saying that by the end of 2026, the entire complex will employ a total of 260 people, and that'll be adding 140 new jobs to the site. So that's a pretty significant jump for a city the size of Yorkton. And also, they say that this complex will now serve more than 5,500 farmers across Saskatchewan and Manitoba, so a fairly large footprint as well. On that note, that'll do it for this week's edition of the SaskAgToday.com Roundtable. On behalf of the Chief Agricultural Editor for SaskAgToday.com, Kevin Hirsch, and 620 CKRM Regina Agri-News Director, Ryan Young, I'm GX94 Yorkton Agriculture Director, Doug Falconer, saying so long until next time.